Welcome to this tutorial on PHP classes as part of the object-oriented series. In this video we are looking at what a class is, the basic syntax of a class, and also how we can apply properties and methods to this class and essentially start to use the class. We're not going to talk too much about the structure. We're going to go ahead and we're going to jump in and start pulling out examples here. So what is a class? Well, a class is something that describes an object. Basically, it's something that essentially lays out different properties, which are essentially variables, and methods, which are essentially PHP functions, and we declare them as functions within a class. We're going to be looking at a class of a product, because a product can extend, which we'll look at later on in the series, and we can apply different properties and different methods to a product as well to do different things to this. So we'll look at how we can go ahead and set up this class, and we'll take it from there. So at the moment you can see I've got an index page open. We're not actually going to define the class in here. In fact, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file that's going to hold the class contents. We're going to go essentially with the easiest way to keep track of different classes, and there are loads of different ways we can name files and directories, but or name classes after the directory that they're stored in. But I'm essentially just going to go ahead and create a new file. And I'm going to go ahead and save this out in another directory. Now you'll see my directory structure at the moment. You see here I've got index page, which is the page I'm working on. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this classes, and within here I'm going to store this file I've just opened as product with a capital P. That's going to be the name of our class.php. So you might want to, create subfolders of this to store different things, depending on how complex your application will get. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll define the class. We'll give the class a name, and we'll create the basic syntax. So I'm going to start with the class keyword, and I'm going to choose the name product as we've already determined. And then this starts with the curly brace here, and then ends with a curly brace. Now everything to do with your class, i.e. the properties and methods, will go within here. So essentially what we have here is valid syntax. It will work. So let's go ahead and include this this class file into our PHP script, or we'll require it once. The reason we require once is because if we were to accidentally require it somewhere else again, we'll have an error occur. So we only want to include it once in our page. So we're going to include classes /product.php. Okay, so if you were to say you had 10 or 15 classes, which is more than likely in a larger application, you would have, or well, I personally would have one file that contains a require for all of them. Then you would just require that one file. However, because we're just working with one at the moment, we'll just require this file in here. Okay, so let's go ahead over to our browser and we'll refresh. You see that we've got no syntax errors, no warnings, anything like that. As I said, this is valid code as it stands at the moment. Now let's go ahead and talk about properties and methods. Now, as I've already briefly mentioned, properties are actually variables within a class, so they represent variables. They can hold data, they can be different data types. Obviously PHP is loosely typed, so for example something like let's do this outside us to not confuse. Let's say I had var. Var could either equal a string or var could equal a number. So essentially properties within a class are exactly the same as they are variables normally in PHP. There's no difference here. So let's go ahead and create a property that we might want to store about this product. Then we'll go ahead and take a look at what methods are, and we'll create a couple of methods. So for example, a product could have a category or a type. We'll give it a type. That just makes sense. And a type, we could define this here, or we could allow our methods to set this property. Now the one thing that we do need to do is give this a visibility keyword at the start of this variable. Now public is basically this is called encapsulation, which we'll look at in a different video. But essentially public, we're saying that anything that, you know, when we instantiate the class, we can actually get access to this this type variable or type property. We can change this type property. However, we do have other methods of visibility for this property. We'll talk about that, you know, in another video. As I said, we can define a type to this. So, for example, we could say food. Just an example, or we could leave it and we could have this, you know, changed using a method. Now with properties, public properties within a product, it's bad practice to set these outside of the class, you know, without a method setting these. Let's just go ahead and take a look at a basic example of how we instantiate the class and get this value. So I'm going to leave this as food. And let's go down here in, into our index.php, and let's go ahead and instantiate this class. So I'm going to create a variable called food, and this is going to equal new. So we're basically, you know, creating an instance of this, if you like, new product. And then we use some curly braces. Now these, or parenthesis, these aren't required. However, it's good practice to keep them because we can actually go ahead and pass parameters into these at a later time. So let's go ahead and leave it at that for now. Let's go ahead and echo out this this variable essentially, or this property within this class. So let's go ahead and do that now. Essentially what I would do is I would echo food, because this is now a product. And we use a hyphen and a greater than sign, which is essentially accessing properties or methods within this class. And then we say type. Now you'll notice a difference between this here and this here, and that is that I haven't included the dollar symbol. And when we access a property or a method within a class, we don't, well, for properties, methods we don't anyway, but for properties are essentially variables, but this would be wrong. This is correct. We just omit the dollar sign. It's as simple as that. So now what's going to happen is we create a new product. So food is now this class here, and we echo out type here within food. Okay, so let's go ahead and refresh, and you see we get food out here. So we've echoed out the type, and you know, we're getting the result of food. Okay, relatively straightforward. So we've looked at properties. That is essentially a property, and as I said, there are different visibility types for properties, and that's called encapsulation, but we'll take a look at that in another video. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this, you know, this value that I've given this variable, and obviously this now is just going to show nothing because there's no value set to this type property. What we're going to do now is we're going to create something called a getter method and a setter method, and the reason that we do this is, let me give you the bad way of doing this first. We could actually say food type is equal to, I don't know, let's just say food, and then we could echo food type. Let's go ahead and refresh, and you see that we've got food. So we're doing this sort of, you know, we're doing this in a, it's not odd, but it's not right. It's not good practice to do this. So what we do is, instead of defining the value before, along with our, you know, our main code, we allow for getter and setter methods to do this for us. So essentially, a getter, a method inside of a property is a function. So I'm going to give it a public keyword, which means it's publicly accessible outside of the class, as well as inside. Don't worry about this too much now. Again, with public, we'll look at that later in encapsulation. We say public function, we give the name of the function. So I'm going to say set product type, and I'm going to create another, which is a public function get product type. So essentially we have two functions that we can either assign a value to this variable or retrieve or return that value. So for set product type, we're going to need to take a parameter. So we need to take a parameter in here. I'll just say value for now. So what we need to do is inside of the set product type, well, let's start with the get product type first because it's easy. Essentially all we do is we return type. Now you may think to say return type. In actual fact, you need to say return this type. As we did before, we omit the $sign. So return this, and this refers to the current object that we're dealing with, and then type again refers to this variable here. Now with set, we do exactly as we do as I just showed you here, but essentially we just say this type is equal to value. Okay, relatively straightforward. So set product type places a value within here, get product type returns that value. Returns, remember, so we can then echo it out. So let's go ahead and do this again. Obviously at the moment when we refresh, nothing is shown, but let's go ahead and as a new line of code, let's go ahead and just say food set product type, and within here let's set that to food. Okay, and now when we echo out food type, we'll echo this value out, but we're not going to echo this out. We'll change that to get product type as well. So let's go ahead and refresh, and you see we've got food, and what's happening is set product type is passing this food value here to here. It's placing the value in this type here, and then we're going to use get product type now to retrieve this value. So let's go ahead and do that. Food get product type, and let's go ahead and refresh, and it does exactly the same thing. So for example, we could say echo this item is a, or is, it doesn't really make sense in context, but let's go ahead and just refresh, and we'll just say this item is food. So there we go. Well, it does make sense. So we're using now methods, getter, this getter, and a setter method to set a value of a property and get a value of a property instead of accessing this property directly. Now you might think this is strange. Why would we do this? Well, later on when we look at things like protected properties, we can't actually access them as we've already seen by accessing this type property directly. We have to use a get method to actually return this value within the class itself. So don't worry if that confuses you for now. This tutorial has essentially been an introduction to classes. Hopefully this overall concept makes sense, and the syntax makes sense, and the difference between properties and methods. Remember, properties are variables, methods are functions within a class. So essentially we can pass values like we do with normal functions, and we can, you know, set values to properties as we would normally do with variables. But this is essentially a basic introduction to classes.